I've been making an effort over the past several days, starting, right, to drink enough water. I think most of us don't drink enough water, and I'm convinced that if I drank more water, there are certain things in my life that would improve. Can't go back now, you girl's hydrated. The Roman Way by Edith Hamilton. Let's move Helen. Bye girl. So I reviewed the Greek Way, shaking my setup. I reviewed the Greek Way not too long ago. That was a review that will be a lot more detailed than the Roman Way. I'm pulling up my review from 2022 is when I read it. And this is a very short review. But I wanted to talk about it anyway because just to put the book out there, especially if you're a fan of ancient Rome, this is a good one. And there's not too much to talk about. I'm pretty much just going to highlight a brief overview, not a whole lot of quotes about what's in this book and why I recommend it. So in The Roman Way by Edith Hamilton, she discusses the features of ancient Roman society, highlighting its key writers, its philosophers, politicians, and leaders. She also, much like in the Greek Way, she also explores ancient Roman culture and societal frameworks and how they compare to the ancient Greeks, along with how the Romans, perhaps even more so, believe it or not, than the Greeks, influenced the Western world. Yes, so if you are in the West or you live in the Western culture, we're heavily Greco-Roman influenced. But we talk about like the Greeks, but Rome also, but for different reasons and in different reasons. And a lot of people say, oh, the Romans just copied the Greeks, but the Romans were brilliant. Ancient Romans were brilliant in their own way as well. And Hamilton makes sure to hammer that home. She spends a significant amount of time in this short book. How many pages? I didn't find the Roman Way to be quite as dense as the Greek Way. The Greek Way could be dense at times, but in a good way. This is just a little over 200 pages. She spends a lot of time discussing the ingredients of the ancient Roman comedies and plays and how their plays have set the standard for today's comedies and plays in the Western world. So, yeah, we can talk about Greek comedies and Greek tragic plays, but our minds, as what she's arguing, our Western minds actually get the Romans way more than we get the Greeks, and how humor is addressed to the audience and how humor is relevant to the culture. So what the audience does or does not, so what does the audience find culturally funny and what is not culturally funny? And how in Roman comedies, ancient Roman comedies, there are stereotypical caricatures of what they found in their own society. And if you look at comedians today, it's the same formula. So a really good comedian knows how to go to, let's say, there's a comedian who is doing a tour nationally. That comedian, if they know what they're doing and they're really good, they're going to cater their show to that location and to that audience. They know how to read the room. So if the same comedian goes from New York to Texas, the humor is going to have to change a little bit. Some of those jokes are going to stay the same because overarchingly, they're both American cities. But New York and Houston, Texas, New York City and Houston, Texas, going to be two different places, right? Different cultures. Certain things are going to land in New York and they aren't going to land in Houston and vice versa. And so that is really a Roman formula for comedy. Hamilton uses these ancient texts to show what also was important in Roman society and how we glean the everyday life of ancient Rome from these ancient plays. And so she spends, like I said, there was no way. I was but to hash all that out clearly when I wrote this review because she'll give you an example and say, oh, this is how they viewed the matriarch. This is how they viewed the patriarch, the mother-in-law, etc. And it is very relatable. 2,000 years later, we're like, that still tracks. She does touch on how the ancient Romans viewed law and democracy and justice, which also, again, set the stage for in the West. And I'm sure there are other places, but she's really paying attention to the West. Our current concept of innocent until proven guilty. That we have the Romans to thank for when it comes to our idea of modern justice. She also discusses in this book, which I found particularly interesting, how the Romans viewed art. They were way more practical than the Greeks, yet that doesn't mean that they lacked creativity or imagination. It was just they just put emphasis on different types of art, or what is art, right? So, and I quote from the book, "In Rome, the true artist is the engineer," which tracks. I actually work with a lot of engineers, and there is an art to it. Okay, so they're not getting up there and painting the Mona Lisa, but it takes a particular type of creative mind to be able to look at something and say, this is how we're going to do this bridge, and then draw it, right? And know how to, it's technical, and obviously it's technical, but it does create creativity to figure that out, and a lot of intelligence. You know, people who can look at how to take it apart and put it back together again, right? That's art to the Romans. And I actually, did I mention this book? I think I mentioned this to my supervisor, who is an engineer. And he was like, oh yeah, engineering is very artistic if you know how to look at it the right way. To the romantic writer, imagination can transcend the narrow limits of experience and move on unhampered by it to what eye hath not seen nor ear heard. So that was just another quote. So yeah, the Romans, she does talk about Stoicism in here, which, did I get to that later? I do get to that, but you can see how the Romans valued practicality a lot. But that, again, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a brilliance there. I mean, the Romans, when it came to the sewer systems, and the ancient Romans really were brilliant. So, of course, you can't talk about ancient Rome without discussing Stoicism. So she spends a decent amount of time. It's succinct for a person who may not be as familiar with Stoicism and its key players. She's still succinct enough but detailed enough to give you an overview to pique your fancy. So if you want to start diving into the ancient Roman Stoics, she gives you a good framework and outline for who to start reading, you know, Marcus Aurelius and so forth, which I need to dive into some Marcus Aurelius. It has been a minute. I'm actually going to wrap this up here, short review. Every now and then you just need a short review. The Roman Way is not a long read, like I've said, but she packs so much information into such a small volume, the same way that she did with the Greek Way. She is an excellent writer. I've said this before about Edith Hamilton. And the Greek Way and the Roman Way are excellent books to read if you want to start getting your feet wet in ancient Greek and Roman society and you're not quite sure where to start, because you look and you're like, I want to start reading some of the ancient Greeks, but where do I start? There's so many. I want to start reading the ancient Romans, but where do I start? There are so many. Where do I start with their plays? Where do I start with their philosophers? She lays it all out and gives you a good place to start, because she's just quoting from the primary sources and talking around them. She also compares and contrasts the Romans, which I think is great because, again, like I said earlier, there's this notion that the Romans just copied the Greeks. Obviously, they were inspired by, but no, they didn't just copy the Greeks. She's arguing that, yes, they were influenced by the Greeks, but the Romans had their own culture, their own quirks, and their own beliefs, and it allows them to hold their own. They are a different type of ancient society than the Greeks. And so she pays homage to that, and she goes on and nips that thought in the bud, right? So that's just a quick little review. I didn't even have a rating here. I just really enjoyed it. Wanted to get this little review out because I did talk about the Greek Way. And so the Roman Way, Edith Hamilton, she's so good, especially when you, again, like I keep saying, especially when you have an interest in the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. I'm going to leave that there. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Also, please feel free, if you feel so inclined, to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first, and I also post goofy things in the Instagram stories. Actually, my Instagram stories, most of it has absolutely nothing to do with books. It's animals and funny reels and goofy memes and nature, scenic photography, because I follow all types of stuff, and I save all types of stuff to post on a rainy day, right? If I need a mood booster. Anyway, that's all. I'm going to wrap this up. It is 1:11, and it is time for lunch. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.